Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be looking at something kind of funny, but also pretty insightful. Pop culture translation fails. You know those times when entertainment goes global and things get a little bit, well, lost in translation?
It really is amazing how, just one little slip up can turn a movie title, a song lyric, or even, a simple video game instruction into a comedic masterpiece.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're turning to the work of global communication guru Salvador Ordorica. He's helped businesses avoid these kinds of blunders. And luckily for us, he's also shared some really great examples in his article, Lost in Pop Culture Translation, when entertainment gets hilariously lost in translation.
What I find fascinating is that a lot of these errors actually come from good intentions. The translators are, just trying to bridge cultures, but sometimes things get hilariously muddled up.
Right. Okay, so let's start with movie titles. Imagine you're in Germany and you see Frozen advertised as the Ice Queen. I mean, talk about a mood killer. It's like they just sucked all the mystery right out of it.
Yeah, it really just shows how hard it can be to capture the feeling of a film's title when you're trying to translate it for different languages. Like a direct word-for-word translation doesn't always work, especially when you've got cultural nuances and things like tone to think about.
And Ordorica's article is full of examples. Die Hard is the crystal jungle in Spain. The Hangover turns into very bad trip in France.
Yeah, and then you've got the one that makes you scratch your head. Army of Darkness turned into Captain Supermarket in Japan.
Captain Supermarket. What in the world does that even mean? But the award for, most literal translation has got to go to Pretty Woman. In China, it became, I would marry a prostitute to save money.
Talk about missing the mark. Makes you wonder how these translations mess with how a film does in different places, Like a bad title could totally sink a movie, right?
Can you imagine seeing a poster for Captain Supermarket and thinking it's going to be all action-packed? You'd walk out of that theater feeling pretty ripped off. But then again, maybe those crazy translations actually make people more curious. Could actually help them reach a bigger audience, right?
It's possible, yeah. It reminds me of something Salvador Ordorica says. To communicate well globally, it's not enough to just, swap out words. It's about understanding the culture and adapting your message to fit.
Totally agree. And if you want to learn more about avoiding these international mishaps, especially in business, you should really check out Ordorica's YouTube channel. It's called Translation Tales.
He does a fantastic job of mixing expert advice with humor and actionable strategies. It's like a crash course on how not to mess up internationally.
Okay, let's move on to music. Song lyrics can take on some pretty wild meanings when they cross borders.
You know Psy, right? That Gangnam Style song? The "Hey, sexy lady" line? Well, in Korean, it's more like, "Hey, classy lady."
So all this time, we've been singing about good manners. I feel a little lied to, haha, but mostly amused.
Well, it's not that simple. It just shows how wordplay and cultural references can get lost, leading to some unintentionally funny interpretations.
Like a game of telephone with languages. And sometimes the ending is pure gold. Like the Beatles' Hey Jude in some Japanese translations became I'm Scared of Monkeys.
Wow, talk about a mood swing.
How about Lady Gaga's Poker Face? The magic of translation turned it into Give Me Your Face cards in some Chinese karaoke bars. I can just picture people belting that out, totally clueless about what it really means.
Yeah, it shows how a simple translation mistake can totally change a song's vibe, sometimes for the better in a comedic sense.
It's a reminder that translation isn't just about replacing words, it's about capturing the spirit, the humor, the feel of the original. And that's where things can get really tricky.
Exactly. And that's why having someone like Salvador Ordorica on your team can be so valuable. He helps navigate those linguistic minefields so your message really gets across, across different cultures.
All right, let's jump into video games. Some of the most famous translation fails have become legendary.
Oh yeah, classics like, "All your base or belong to us," Those phrases are internet gold.
It's like those mistakes weren't just errors, they were like little bursts of accidental comedic genius.
And even though games are better localized now, we still get some hilarious blunders. Ordorica mentions Final Fantasy XIV, where "thank you" was once translated as "I'm covered in bees."
Imagine playing that game and seeing those words pop up. It'd be pretty tough to keep a straight face.
It just shows that even with all the fancy translation tech we have, the human touch is still super important. You need that cultural awareness, that sense of humor, to make sure the translation really works.
Oh, and speaking of classic game translations, remember Team Rocket's motto in Pokemon? prepare for trouble and make it double.
Yeah, every Pokemon fan knows that one.
But the original Japanese version, it was closer to, we're the evil gang that causes problems for people. Not quite as catchy, right?
The English version definitely has more pizzazz. It's like a textbook example of how a good translator can adapt a phrase but still keep its essence.
Makes you wonder how many other lines from our favorite games were totally different in the original.
Yeah.
Right? Like a whole hidden world of alternate dialogue.
It really makes you appreciate the work of translators, who often go unnoticed but play a huge role in how we experience entertainment.
For sure. They're walking a tightrope, trying to stay true to the original while being culturally sensitive and creative.
And that's where someone like Salvador Ordorica is so helpful. He provides the guidance to avoid those pitfalls and really nail global communication.
Now let's talk about those auto-generated subtitles. They've created a whole new level of translation entertainment, haven't they?
Definitely. Super convenient, but they often miss the nuances that a human translator would catch, leading to some hilarious situations.
Ordrika mentions a viral Chinese cooking video where heat up the wok was misheard as oil in the bamboo, which then became a meme. Crazy how a simple misunderstanding can blow up online.
It shows that even in a world of increasing automation, human understanding and cultural context are still essential for good communication.
There's another example from Ordrika's article, a Korean makeup tutorial where blend the eyeshadow carefully was translated as gently assault your eyelids.
Yikes, I wouldn't want to follow those instructions.
It's both scary and hilarious, right? Those auto-generated subtitles, with all their flaws, definitely make online culture more entertaining.
True. But on a serious note, these examples show the risks of relying solely on automated tools for translation.
You wouldn't want to send out a business email with gently assault your eyelids in it, would you?
Definitely not. And that's where someone like Salvador Ordorica is so valuable. He helps people navigate the linguistic minefields and ensure their message gets across clearly and without those accidental comedic twists.
All right, so what can we take away from all these hellacious translation fails?
I think it reminds us that language is powerful, but also incredibly complex. One word or phrase can mean totally different things in different cultures.
And as we've seen, those differences can lead to some really funny, sometimes cringeworthy results.
But more importantly, it highlights the need for cultural sensitivity, especially in today's interconnected world.
We need to be mindful of those nuances and learn from each other, even from our mistakes.
Because in the end, it's about building bridges, not walls. It's about understanding and connection across cultures. That's something worth working towards, even if we trip up and get a few laughs along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, let's take a deeper dive into the meaning of these translation fails and why they matter beyond just being funny.
What I find interesting is how these mistakes show the huge impact of language and culture on our entertainment experiences.
It's like they add another layer of enjoyment, an unexpected twist that makes us appreciate the content in a new way.
And like Salvador Ordorica points out, sometimes a wrong translation can actually become more popular than the original. It becomes part of the cultural landscape around that piece of media.
Like all your base or belong to us. It's such a big part of gaming culture. It's hard to imagine it any other way.
Exactly. And it also reminds us that translation is done by humans, that it's not just about switching words, but about understanding culture and being sensitive.
It's about connecting languages and cultures, not just through words, but emotions, humor, and the whole cultural context.
And sometimes, in that process, we stumble upon these little gems of hilarity.
It's a reminder to embrace those imperfections and find joy in the unexpected twists and turns of language.
Beautifully put. So the next time you see a weird translation in a movie, song, or game, remember to enjoy it. You might just be witnessing the next big internet meme in the making.
And it might just make you want to explore the world of language and culture a bit more, appreciate the intricacies of translation, and strive for a better understanding in our increasingly connected world.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of translation fails.
We've already uncovered some pretty epic blunders in movie titles, song lyrics, video games. But trust me, we've only just scratched the surface of this linguistic comedy goldmine.
Yeah, today we're going even deeper. Thanks to the insights of Salvador Ordorica, we're going to explore how these mishaps show up in everyday life.
Let's talk about product packaging. Like, one little translation error can totally turn a whole marketing campaign into a disaster.
Right. Imagine a product that's supposed to have this amazing feature, but when it's translated, it sounds totally ridiculous, maybe even offensive in another language.
Yeah, that would be a nightmare.
Ordorica gives a perfect example in his work. This laundry detergent, it was marketed in the Middle East with the slogan, washes whiter than white. Sounds harmless enough, right?
Yeah, I guess so, but
Well, in some Arabic dialects, that phrase implied that the detergent would, like, strip all the color out of your clothes.
oh no. Talk about a laundry nightmare. I bet people were scared to even touch it.
It's a perfect example of how a simple phrase can have completely different meanings in different cultures. And the consequences for a business can be huge.
Yeah, imagine launching a product with a slogan that accidentally insults your customers. Talk about a PR disaster. It really shows how important it is to get professional translations, especially when you're going global.
Absolutely. Orderica talks about this all the time. He's seen firsthand how trying to save money on translation can end up costing companies way more in the long run.
Okay, let's move on to another area where translation fails are pretty common. Signage. You know, those public notices, restroom signs, restaurant menus.
They're supposed to guide us, right?
Yeah, but sometimes they end up leading us astray in the most hilarious ways possible.
Oh, yeah.
Puerto Rico mentions this sign in a Japanese hotel that read, "You are invited to take advantage of the chambermaid." I'm pretty sure that wasn't what they meant to say.
Definitely not. That's what happens when you do a direct translation without thinking about the culture, you know? Lead to some pretty awkward situations.
And then there's that infamous sign, "We serve cat food," that was spotted in a Chinese restaurant. I really hope they meant something else.
One can only hope. But it just shows that even simple translations can go hilariously wrong if you're not careful.
Oh, and let's not forget those signs that are so badly translated, they're basically impossible to understand. Like you're looking at them and wondering if you've stepped into some alternate dimension where language doesn't even make sense anymore.
Those are always a treat.
Yeah, they make you realize just how much we depend on clear communication to get around in the world.
Absolutely.
So these signage fails, they're not just funny. They remind us that we need to understand different cultures and that language can be really tricky.
Exactly. It's not just about getting the words right. It's about understanding how those words will be understood in a different culture. And that's where Orderica's expertise is so valuable.
Mhm.
He helps businesses avoid these kinds of traps and make sure they're communicating their message accurately and respectfully.
So next time you're traveling abroad, keep an eye out for those translation fails.
Yeah.
They're not just funny, they also give you a little glimpse into different cultural perspectives.
Yeah, and they remind us that good communication takes effort and awareness.
Exactly. And hey, if you spot one of these linguistic gems, snap a pic and share it. Let's all have a laugh and learn from each other's mistakes, and from businesses' mistakes too, I guess.
Yeah, why not?
All right, let's shift gears a bit and think about why we find these translation fails so funny. What is it about these linguistic blunders that makes us laugh?
Well, I think part of it is the surprise factor. We don't expect to see these errors, so they catch us off guard and we laugh. Like our brains just love finding things that don't quite fit.
Yeah, it's like seeing a sign that's supposed to say, "Beware of the pickpocket," but it's translated as "Beware of the pocket picker." So close, but so hilariously wrong.
Exactly. And I think maybe there's also a little bit of a superiority thing going on, but not in a mean way. Like when we see someone else mess up, especially with language, it makes us feel a little bit smug, like, oh, I would never do that.
Of course, we all make mistakes, but there's something about language errors that kind of exposes us. It's like we're seeing into someone's head for a second and they're confused. And for some reason, we find that funny.
Yeah, maybe it's because language is so tied to who we are and how we connect with others. So when we see someone struggle with it, it makes us feel more confident about our own language skills.
I think there's also an element of relief. Like when we see a translation fail that's harmless, it reminds us that not every mistake leads to disaster. It can even make us feel a little bit better about our own screw-ups.
Yeah, it's a reminder to not take ourselves too seriously.
Right. And there's a social side to it, too. When we share these translation fails with others, it's like we're bonding over a shared joke, a funny experience that brings us closer together.
It's like we're all in on the joke, and that feeling of shared laughter can be really powerful.
It reminds us that even when we're different, we can find common ground through humor. But of course, while we're all for a good laugh, we have to remember that translation is a tough job. The people who work hard to bridge the gaps between languages, they deserve our respect.
Absolutely. They play such an important role in helping us communicate and understand each other in a globalized world. And sure, We might laugh at a translation fail now and then, but we should also appreciate all the skill and hard work that goes into this profession.
Yeah, they're like the unsung heroes of communication, making sure messages are clear and accurate across different languages and cultures.
Exactly. And if you ever need something translated, get a professional to do it. They'll help you avoid those costly and embarrassing mistakes.
Like Salvador Ordorica always says, don't let your message get lost in translation. His YouTube channel, Translation Tales, is a great place to learn more about cross-cultural communication.
Yeah, he's full of helpful tips and insights.
Okay, let's get a bit more serious and talk about the ethics of translation. We've been having fun with the funny side of these fails, but we need to acknowledge that mistranslations can have real-world consequences. And sometimes those consequences can be pretty serious.
Right, like a mistranslation can lead to misunderstandings, miscommunication, even conflict.
Think about legal documents, medical instructions, political speeches. One wrong word, one mistranslated phrase can have a huge impact on people's lives.
Yeah, it's a reminder that translation isn't just about conveying words. It's about conveying meaning, intent, the nuances of the culture.
And when those things get lost in translation, the consequences can be pretty big. So while we enjoy the funny side of translation fails, we also need to be aware of the importance of accuracy, responsibility, and ethical practices in translation.
It's about respecting language and recognizing how much power it has to shape our understanding of the world.
And it's about making sure our messages are clear, accurate, and sensitive to the culture we're communicating with.
Exactly. Because in the end, effective communication is about building bridges, not walls. It's about fostering understanding, empathy, connection.
Well said. Okay, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's take a minute to think about what we've learned.
We went beyond pop culture, looking at how translation fails happen in everyday life, from product packaging to those signs we see out in the world.
We also explored why we find these mistakes so funny, talking about the surprise factor, the sense of superiority we might feel, and how shared laughter can bring us together.
But we also touched on the serious side of translation, how miscommunication can actually cause harm when language isn't treated with care and respect.
And we stressed how important ethical practices are in translation, making sure messages are conveyed accurately, sensitively, and with a good understanding of cultural nuances.
Right. So what does this all mean for you?
It means that language is complex, full of challenges and endless possibilities for both humor and insight.
It means we should approach language with curiosity, humility, and a willingness to learn from our mistakes, because even the smallest slip-up can have unexpected consequences.
And it means celebrating the diversity of languages and cultures, appreciating the richness they bring to our world, but most importantly, it means trying to communicate effectively, responsibly, and with a deep appreciation for the power of language to connect us all.
Okay, get ready for the grand finale. In part 3, we'll be sharing some of our favorite listener-submitted translation fails, and we'll give you some tips and tricks for avoiding these blunders in your own communication.
We'll also be looking at the future of translation in an increasingly globalized world. So stay tuned because there's a lot more to discover. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're wrapping up our hilarious and insightful exploration of translation fails.
We've journeyed through the world of mistranslated movie titles, song lyrics, video games, product packaging, even public signage. All thanks to the incredible example shared by global communication expert Salvador Ordorica.
But now it's time to hear from you, our listeners. You've been out there in the real world encountering these linguistic gems firsthand. So let's dive into some of our favorite listener-submitted translation fails.
Okay, this first one comes from a listener who was on vacation in Spain. They saw a sign at their hotel pool that was supposed to say, "Pool closed for maintenance," but because of a translation mishap, it actually read, "Pool closed for technical intercourse."
Oh my, I can only imagine the confusion. And maybe a little intrigue, among the hotel guests. Did anyone try to sneak in for a peek at this technical intercourse?
We can only wonder. But it's a classic example of how a simple phrase can take on a whole new meaning when it crosses cultural and linguistic borders.
Okay, here's another one. This time from a listener who was dining in Italy. They ordered a dish described on the menu as chicken with a delicate sauce. However, the translation they got was chicken with a sick sauce.
Ooh, not very appetizing, is it? Makes you wonder if the chef sneezed in the sauce or something.
I'm sure that wasn't the case. But it just goes to show how even small changes in wording can make a big difference in meaning, especially when it comes to food.
Right, you want to make people hungry, not make them lose their appetite.
Exactly. These listener stories, they're not just funny, they really emphasize how important careful and accurate translation is, especially for businesses that are trying to make a good impression.
Absolutely.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, let's give our listeners some practical advice on how to avoid becoming the next translation fail meme.
All right, first things first. Never rely only on those automatic translation tools. They can be helpful for getting the general idea of a text, but they often miss the subtleties and cultural understanding that's needed for a really accurate and effective translation.
Right. Remember that example Salvador Ordorica shared about the out-of-office message that was translated into Spanish as something like, I'm outside the office, probably drunk. You definitely don't want that kind of message going out to your clients.
No, definitely not. So yeah, invest in professional translation services, especially when it comes to important stuff that could affect your brand or your reputation.
Good point. And always double-check your translations with a native speaker of the language you're targeting. They can catch those little errors or cultural misunderstandings that you might have missed.
Yeah, and this is especially important when you're dealing with humor or slang. Those are often the trickiest things to translate accurately.
It's not just about swapping out words. It's about making sure that the feeling, the intended meaning, comes through in the other language.
Right. And finally, don't be afraid to ask for help. If you're ever unsure about a translation, reach out to a language expert or someone like Salvador Ordorica who really knows global communication.
Exactly. Remember, his Translation Tales YouTube channel is a great resource for anyone who wants to get better at cross-cultural communication.
He's got so much knowledge and advice, and he presents it all in a fun and engaging way. He can really help you navigate the tricky world of cross-cultural communication and avoid those costly and embarrassing mistakes.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of translation fails, let's remember that language is a powerful tool. It can be a source of laughter, connection, and, as we've seen, even a bit of embarrassment.
True, but most importantly, it's a bridge that connects us to different cultures and different ways of seeing the world.
So let's embrace those complexities, learn from our mistakes, and continue to explore all the ways that words shape our
That's
lives.
a great way to put it.
And on that note, a huge thank you to you, our listeners, for joining us on this linguistic adventure. Keep an ear out for those translation fails. They're out there, lurking in the most unexpected places, waiting to make you laugh, think, and appreciate the wonderfully weird world of language.